Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to a brand new week of Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting all about validation. So the things we're touching on are how to validate yourself and others, what happens when validation is missing, and taking ownership of our part in making things better. Before we get into it, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
We've had such a big week.
We have had a massive week.
Massive week. So we flew from Sydney to South Australia, I think on Wednesday. And we had a bit of a bougie experience because we got to fly business, which was very luxe for us. We would much rather have a little bit of extra cash to spend on our vacay rather than spend it on flights. But,
sitting in seat 1A.
Yes, it was kind of nice. So that was a really nice little stretch kind of experience. So that kind of fueled me up a little bit and I felt a bit special.
Yep.
But then we have been spending so much time with our friends and our family while we've been here. We've been here almost a week already.
Yeah, we have.
It's gone super fast. But yeah, we've, seen lots of our friends have kids, and kids are just this weird marker of time because they change so much in 6 months since we've been back in SA.
Yeah, they really do, don't they?
Yeah, but it's been because we were staying for a little bit longer this trip. We've got a little bit less pressure, so it's not just like this speedy lunch date or coffee date. We do actually have a bit of time to have some sleepovers at our friends' places and, a bit more leisurely cook dinner and have a few more incidental kind of conversations rather than speed catch up one by one. So it's just a sense of being refueled by our friends and our family and that quality time.
Yeah, and that's essentially my fuel up for the week too. So it was really lovely over the Easter weekend. We went and caught up with my family. So we caught up with my grandparents and my parents and my sister and brother and all of their
nieces and nephews.
Yeah, their nieces and nephews. But it was really lovely. So we went 10-pin bowling and mini golfing with the whole fam. And it was really lovely just to spend some time with my grandparents who I haven't spent a lot of time with recently. And also, nieces and nephews who grow up super quick and who we haven't seen for quite some time now. So, yeah, really nice to spend some good time with them, doing some fun activities as well, and just really enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, but we also had a bit of a romantic fuel up because we had a little mini date in there too. We had a sunset, fish and chips and cider on the beach date, which was super lovely, and it was nice to have a bit of time and space for us amongst the busyness of seeing all of our friends and family too.
And that is one of the massive benefits of being away from home. And even if you are in someone else's home, that you can actually relax completely because there is nothing to do other than relax or be. There's
no washing to hang out.
No, there's no chores.
Dishwasher to unpack. No little maintenance-y type tasks to draw you back in. Yeah, we've had a really nice week. Yeah. Busy but amazing week.
So looking forward to the next couple of weeks. But now, let's introduce this week's guest.
Today we've got Brian Fretwell joining us. Brian is a speaker and author helping people focus on what's right with people. He's the founder of PeopleStrength, a platform for helping leaders, coaches, and influential people strengthen their teams through deeper connections, powerful questions, and consistent workouts. Him and his wife, Jamie, have just had their 17th wedding anniversary. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Hey, so this is really cool because you are the first guest joining us on the show who was discovered on TikTok.
I've heard that more times lately than I care to admit. Yeah, but if it works, great. I love the platform, so that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So the video that jumped out, you were talking about validation, but I understand that that's actually not where the beginning of your career kind of started. Can you give us a bit of a wrap up of, who you are and what you've been writing about and speaking about across your career?
Yeah, boy, that's try to do this without babbling on for 40 minutes. I started as a teacher in a juvenile corrections facility. I left college with a teaching degree, worked with kids that were drug addicts and drug dealers on the outs, and fantastic kids when they were inside, and learned about behavioral change and really how systemic problems create those. And so I got my MBA and went into consulting and speaking to try to actually influence the system as opposed to working in the system. And so now I work with adults to help them understand their brains and look at emotional intelligence and people skills from a different perspective in terms of like building a muscle as opposed to just knowing stuff, right? If any of that makes sense. So worked the last 10 or 15 years doing neuroscience consulting everywhere from Perth, Australia to up in the Arctic Circle in Canada, teaching everything from minors to tech workers how their brains work and how they rely on each other as it relates to relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of your latest products or offerings really is around improving the questions that we ask each other. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and especially that TikTok was on this idea of validation. And a lot of people think of validate. Well, let's see, from this standpoint, most people want to help the people around them, but we're sort of conditioned that help is giving advice or giving an answer. And if you think about it in terms of relationship, one of the most common experiences is one partner brings a problem to the other person, but they didn't bring it for that other person to solve them, yet that person goes into solving mode. And what that person's actually bringing is a question about connection and isolation and confidence. And when we answer, even though we're trying to be helpful, we actually remove all three of those. And so we look at validation not as just like you did a good job, but how is somebody actually seen and heard? Because neurobiologically, that's what the brain needs, that feeling of being in a pack, like a pack animal, like acceptance. It needs social connection, like it needs food or water. And sometimes in our attempt to validate people, we actually kind of make them invisible. And that's in any kind of relationship we might have.
Brian, can you talk to that a little bit more, that idea of needing human connection the same way that we need food or water? I mean, around the world this past 12-ish months, we've been saying we need to socially distance. And yet you've just said that's actually really harmful for us.
Yeah, so it has less to do with actual like physical closeness. Now, it's a little bit more, the physical closeness, if you're an extrovert, is a little more, right? You feel that more. It's really the idea of like, am I connected with someone in terms of like, am I, again, back to that kind of seen and heard, but like in the States, there's a book, Vivek Murthy wrote a book on loneliness. It's called Together. And he talks about somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% in the US. And the number was, he cited an Australian statistic that was very similar, feel lonely. And not just feel lonely, but clinical loneliness. And clinical loneliness is actually the worst health issue you can have. You'd be better off smoking 15 cigarettes a day and having a friend or someone that sees you than to be a non-smoker without a friend. And so when we talk about like how this works, there's your brain's designed for safety. And we all understand that in the physical world, like fight or flight, run from a bear. But the same part of your brain that lights up when you're running from a bear, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which sends distress signals, communicates to your amygdala, the hypothalamus, all of that. And this is work by Susan Eisenberg out of, I believe, Stanford. When you experience social pain, your brain acts in virtually the same manner as it's responding to physical pain. So being rejected, being not seen, being not heard physically hurts, if you will. Like, and so recovering from that, like your brain's need for that is as great as food or water. And if you've had somebody break up or leave, you hear it in our verbiage. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't think. And that's all telling of what the brain is doing, which is shutting off all of the unnecessary resources until we meet that connection. Because anthrobiologically, meaning as our brain has grown and adapted, the human brain made a bet on connection being the number one most important thing for survival. And so when we feel disconnected, when we don't feel like we're seen or heard, it's equal, again, from the brain standpoint, it's getting hit in the leg with a bat. But we don't think of it that way in our society. But so we're trying to help people see that, and using questions is a way of allowing somebody to be heard without getting into that telling mode. And it's actually, the flip side of that is asking questions is a lot harder than it sounds.
So talk to us about that. How do we ask better questions?
So I'm a former teacher, so I'm all about let's try it out. So can I use you two as guinea pigs?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So you're going to ask each other, but we'll do it just really quick, right? Just like a 2-minute breakdown. And so here's the rules. So one of you will decide to go first, and then you'll have, let's say 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. So whoever goes first, you'll ask the question and the other person gets to answer. But for 3 minutes, the only thing you can do is ask more questions. Fair? Sound good? You both in?
Yeah.
There's a little
Yeah.
nervousness, like what questions are you going to ask? Yeah. So the question that I'll toss out, and it's a tough one, but I think you guys will do a really good job on it. The question you'll ask each other, and again, you can decide who goes first, is in the last week, how did our relationship improve because of you? And I'll loosely watch the time. So go ahead. And again, you'll ask, and then you can only continue questions for 3 minutes. So go ahead.
So, Sammy, in the last week, how has our relationship improved because of you?
Well, last week we had a friction point around our meals and around our food and what we were going to eat for the week. And I was carrying all of the mental load of what groceries did we have in the fridge? What did we need to get? When were we going to be home to eat? When were we going to be out to eat? And the budget that was going with that. And we had a conversation the week earlier that I was feeling really fatigued doing all of those things. And I had raised it as something that needed to change, and I needed you to lift your game in it. And then when it was occurring in consecutive week number 2, I raised it in what I felt was quite a constructive way to highlight that this was now not just like a singular problem, and that what are the steps that we're going to implement so that this doesn't continue to happen. And I think that helped improve our relationship because we did have a really constructive conversation about, mental load of running our household.
So how did you feel once you had raised that issue?
I think there was a sense of not again. Like, honestly, am I having to say this again? So probably a bit of fatigue, probably a bit of frustration in just even having the conversation or knowing that I needed to lean into having the conversation, because if I knew that if I didn't have that conversation, I just kept on doing that also wouldn't be good for our relationship. So I think that was probably the before and during kind of emotions. But afterwards I did feel heard, and I felt like you got it.
So that's 3 minutes. We'll pause, right? We'll stop in there. I'm curious your experience on both sides. So by the way, we generally do that for 10 minutes. So you were getting a nice little warm up, right?
Yeah.
But generally you can get an idea in the first 3. So Sammy, tell me about that experience for you.
I think Nathan and I had debriefed that interaction a couple of days ago. So it was still quite fresh in my mind. So that was probably why it was quite easy, I guess. But no, it's just Nathan was present and he let me speak.
And how about you, Nathan? How was the interaction for you?
Yeah, I thought the interaction was good. And I think because I was listening from a place of knowing that I needed to be asking more questions, I was actually listening more deeply. I wasn't just there to nod and agree and take it. Yeah, I was there to engage and to be adding some value or be pushing continuing the conversation. Yeah,
and it's that simple piece of like when I'm asking the question that when I take it out of the context, we call it like the event, right? So I can use this skill, but if I use it in an event, meaning like in the midst of a conversation where we're trying to solve a problem, then I don't get to explore. And when we have that, like I'm just asking questions, we're literally practicing relationship. like going to work. Like I used to be an ultra runner, run 100-mile races, and you can know all about running, but unless you're out there running, like tomorrow, even though I've run a 100-mile race, if I ran 20 miles tomorrow, I'd be almost crippled, like trying to walk because I'm pretty out of shape right now. Yeah. And we can try it the other way if you want, but I thought we'd give that example. But
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sammy's like, I got some questions.
I want to do it.
Okay, rock and roll.
Nate, in the last week, what went well in our relationship or improved our relationship because of you?
So it was your birthday last week, and I think what helped improve our relationship was me communicating love to you in your love language, in the way that you love to receive love, which is around, which your primary love language is around receiving gifts.
And how was that?
It felt really great, actually, to be able to give you something and see you really light up and see you really enjoy receiving gifts. And even throughout the day, throughout your birthday, there was gifts always coming through the door, and just seeing you light up, I thought that was really, really beautiful.
And what did you learn from the gift-giving experience?
So I think for me, it just revalidated how much you do, or how important it is to you to really put some thought and energy into gift giving, and to make it a real priority. Yeah, to show you how much I love you.
And how do you think that'll impact our relationship?
Well, I think it definitely keeps it front and center, like seeing how much you do light up when receiving gifts or when being shown love in your love language. And I think that does, continue to keep us connected and really close.
Good job. Good job. That's somewhere around 3 minutes. Nice work. That was fantastic for 3 minutes. Now let's debrief that one. Nathan, you'll go first this time. How was that experience for you? Like, what did you think about answering? What did you notice?
It didn't come all that naturally to continue to answer questions. Yeah, I can see that it could definitely be a muscle that if you haven't exercised, it does feel a bit unnatural, and
yeah, there's almost a part like, why are you asking those questions, right?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, a little bit.
And then I noticed you pushed into it. What did you notice once you pushed into that?
Once I pushed into it, I did feel myself getting deeper, or like diving further into the conversation and feeling a bit more connection.
So psychologically, if you will, we call that taking the implicit and making it explicit. So it's sort of like some of the ways that we show care and concern to other people, and especially those closest to us, we start to assume, right? We start to just almost take for granted, and especially in ourselves. Like, I did this thing for my spouse the other day, but I didn't communicate why. And so I start to take advantage, or I start to take for granted why I'm doing it. And she never hears it. She never understands that. Like, for me, one of the things is putting away dishes. I put away dishes because I know my wife doesn't like to. Now I've made a little stretching game out of it. So there's a whole side bit. But I get to do that in the morning to kind of put that like, okay, yep, it's 7:00 this morning. I'm at least not a jerk, right? So I put in the non-jerk category this one thing. But if I don't communicate to her why I'm doing that, right, that it's about her and it's about just trying to do one thing to make her day earlier, then I miss that as much as she does. Sammy, how about you asking the questions? What did you notice? Which you were fantastic, by the way. You should teach a class, maybe. Like, great job. Yeah.
I noticed that Nath was deferring back to the same type of answer regardless of the question that I asked.
And what type of answer was that? Because I noticed you stirring around in the question just to try to move him off of that. But how would you define that type of answer?
He was giving a top level answer. He was giving it was lighting you up, and he was like talking about the way that I had experienced that, not talking about his experience and how it made him feel to do those things. I think for maybe 3 or 4 of those questions he answered, it was really nice to see you lit up, but that wasn't him taking responsibility or accountability or sitting with the positive consequences of what his action.
And you've just identified like real validation. It's like what you just in taking ownership of our part in making things better is how we say This is how I provide for the pack, right? This is how I bring value. This is accepting. And to do that, like the hardest part is me accepting that I am bringing that. Like it's actually uncomfortable. It's psychologically saying, here's the part that I impact out loud. Here's the part that I impact positively, by the way. It's easier to say, here's what I impact negatively than it is to say, here's what I impact positively, because it actually psychologically puts us at risk, right? What if I say I'm good at this and somebody says no? We've all experienced that. And those are very painful experiences. And so when being able to work as you two just did, especially with couples, especially in that partner, but we also do it in businesses, those other things, but to be able to be vulnerable enough to share that because you built that trust, part through the consistency of the conversations, but also right in those actions, that's where we get closer. Like that's where we build the bonds, because it's uncomfortable to say it out loud. But when we can say it out loud, that means we're accepted and that our voice can actually have some freedom, be heard. Like I don't have to hide it anymore, right?
So Brian, how can we use this in our relationships, in our romantic relationships? How can we use this idea?
So we try to help people think of this not as like, oh, I know how to ask questions and now I have a list of 80 questions, but to think about that, as we said earlier, in terms of like fitness. Like questions are just a really good tool for your brain because you can't not answer a question, right? They call it instinctive elaboration there. So in terms of rewiring, it's going to get a lot more. And then saying it out loud, there's just a lot more kind of basically neurochemistry involved. But the hardest thing to do is do it consistently. And so our platform, we actually have weekly workouts. So Thursday, Friday, that's what people, that's a big part of what people come in and pay memberships. And we actually, it's funny, when we first designed this, we were just doing it for entrepreneurs and COVID had happened. And this is something I've done with some friends for a while. But about 5 months in, because we had about 100 people signed up, a couple people started saying, hey, can I bring my spouse? It's like, yeah, absolutely. Because it was all free at the time. We were just doing this experiment. And right after they said it, they would say, and can they come on a different time? Because they understood like the practice piece is important, because I would argue that like you doing it with each other is actually almost more event space, right? Like, because it's loaded, you have that. And so we provide a place for people to practice. And so I encourage people, go practice with a friend. Just practice conversation is as ridiculous as it might sound. And that's why we create the structure. You ask a question and you have 10 minutes. The other has 10 minutes. You can't give advice. You can't give it feedback. You can't give opinion. You're just exploring that question. It's something we do at our company. We start the day. Every day we start, and what did you do well yesterday? What did you do well yesterday? And we have other questions that we ask as well. But with couples, getting that practice outside of the relationship so that then you actually get the practice inside. But maybe the most important thing is treating it like any other workout. So I don't know about you, but if the workout is not in my calendar, like if it didn't say go running at 4:00 today, the chances of it might not happen, even though it's in my calendar. Let's be honest, but it has to be consistent, because what you're trying to do is say, through that exercise and activity, I want to stay in shape for the important conversations. I don't want to wait for my partner to communicate that they don't feel validated, right, when it's maybe too late, right, or where we've done unnecessary damage because it wasn't communicated. And the part of consistently learning about the other person, once that goes away, that's really bad in any relationship. And so practicing allows us to understand, even in that conversation that you both just had, even though you've had that conversation recently, it's when we practice and go deeper, we discover there's always more to learn. And that changes how we see each other in, I think, a really healthy way.
So how does this conversation affect the giver and the receiver differently? And how are they both receiving validation?
Yeah, fair. No, it's great. So let's start with the person asking the question, because oftentimes that's where people come first, because they come to, I want to learn to, for me, it was the practice of learning to shut up, right? I'm a speaker for a living. Like I used to get on my report cards as a kid. He's great if he just shut his mouth a little more, right? So I just now, as a business, but because our need to help is so ingrained, we actually really struggle to be quiet when we need to be quiet. And we understand intellectually that questions are good, but then you get in a situation and you feel that it's hard to stop. So we force people to do that. And what happens is it builds the feedback loop, because you're communicating now to the experience brain. Oh, I asked 4 questions and I got so much more. And I only need so many. The more I get that experience, the more then I can habitually apply it when I'm out there. And when I'm asking questions and somebody has that, like you can see the change. That's where the term fires came from. When you can see the change, that validates that help that you're trying to give. Like that makes you feel, I did something today. And sometimes we get these people that, they're on the call for the week and they said, man, I had a horrible week, but I really feel like I helped so-and-so, right? And so you can do that just in that conversation. And now if you're being asked the questions, it's really about clarity. And that's why we have kind of an acronym, FIRES, which is feelings, influence, resilience, ethics, and strengths. So we're focusing the questions on places that will help you create clarity on the things that you do well, the things you care about, how you get over challenges. And because of that, it's just a fantastic way to learn about each other, number one, but also see how people, right, think and process differently. But saying, again, for the person being asked, saying, here's what I've done. Here's how I got over. Here's how I expressed this strength. Here's what I did this week that was meaningful. Every single week, we have people come on and we'll get a note, or we'll have them, like I'll get an email or a text and somebody just said, that was the most powerful 10 minutes I've had all week. Or especially when we get new people, it's almost just quiet. It's in such low supply right now. The reason those loneliness numbers are so tough is we really suck at giving people space to be heard. We're really good at giving advice. We got answers to everything. But like, if we could do a little bit more shutting up and asking people what's right with them, they wouldn't need so much of our advice, or I guess a better way to say that, because there's fantastic advice and I do trainings and all that. The advice we're giving would be implemented at a much higher degree if the more systems we have in place for people to, to implement these skills and feel connected. And we've kind of moved our business model to help helpers do that, so that trainers and consultants can actually go and run their own groups with their folks. And we provide all the questions and the resources. And because we just think the problem is so big that we want to leverage the other coaches, HR managers, all the other helping folks out there and say, yes, do your training and also do the workout, and you'll get much better results.
Brian, it kind of comes back to that thing. It's super simple. Like, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
For a reason, right? Yeah, 2 ears and 1 mouth in that capacity. Yeah, that's a great insight. Yeah.
Hey, so what I would love to know is, Nath mentioned the love languages in our little exercise there. And Nath and I both understand that we give and receive love in different ways, and sometimes that's not always the same as our partner. Is validation the same? Like, do people receive validation through verbal, or how do we receive it or create it?
Yeah, there's definitely, where we're talking broad validation, there is definitely, a spectrum of how I like, what degrees, where it is. Now, understanding everybody needs it. And generally, when people say, I don't need it, they're either not acknowledging where they're getting it, or they're taking care of it in a different manner, which is usually maladaptive. But in broader terms, like an extrovert, they want to be told out loud in front of everybody how awesome they are. An introvert, if you do that, they'll never talk to you again. And so I really, it's a very individual thing, right? What we're doing with the questions is a practice so that the person can understand. I think one of the biggest things that comes out for some people is being able to ask for or rather identify in themselves how validation works for them and how to get whatever it is they need, but then also be able to ask questions so they see other people get it differently. So it's a very individualized answer. And I think that's for couples or for teams, that's what makes it fun, is it goes back and one of your jobs is to learn what it looks like for that person, knowing that what it looks like now might not be the same as what it's going to look like 5 years from now. And that's what's cool, right? Is that we're not fixed states. We are constantly, if you will, evolving, adapting, changing individuals. I've been married 17 years, and we tell people all the time we've had 7 marriages. It just happened to be to the same person, right?
Yeah.
It's cheaper that way, I suppose. But but like you evolve and become, different. And if you're curious about that, you get to say, oh, who's this person? And does this fit? And how does it fit? And where does it fit? As opposed to saying, well, this is who I am and this is who you're supposed to be. Once it gets in that fixed state, then there's expectations and you've lost discovery. And it doesn't matter if that's a marriage, a team, or an entire business. Once discovery is gone, the clock has started to tick, for sure.
So you kind of mentioned earlier that within your work team that you've got this practice of doing it every morning. So would you recommend something similar for a relationship, or like how would you recommend actually implementing this into our lives?
So my wife and I practice a bit. And sometimes I cue her in that we're practicing. Sometimes I don't. And what I mean by that is how can we take issues sometimes and explore them for the sake of exploring them, as opposed to trying to solve them. And that sounds like a small, but it's a huge to be able to say. And so for me, it's coming to her and saying, I responded this way, which for me is usually like shutting down or saying something I shouldn't have, right? And I responded this way. Can you help me figure out like where this might come from? Like what might be behind it? Like let's talk about the situation. But it's got to be in a practice area, meaning that we don't have to solve it. I've already apologized, or, all of that stuff has happened. I just want to use this person next to me who knows me, our brains are attuned with each other, who can, press my buttons as quickly as anybody, because we know that about each other. But we also know that, like, oh, okay, because of that, and we kind of run off this idea of, if I'm upset with her, it's reflective of something I'm not happy about in myself. And so there's no better person to help me explore that than the other one. Now, but it has to be, again, going back to it consistently being able to, so daily, hey, why'd you put the dishes away like that? Instead of, why the hell did you put the dishes away like that? Right. But just, maybe I have my way and you have my way. And let's where did that come from? And especially if you're younger in the relationship, 9 times that you ask that question, where that came from is you saw your parents doing it and you don't really agree with how they do it, but you've just always done it and it feels nice. And so, but you get behind it and you're like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to do it that way. But if you come right after it, why did you do that? Then you're just butting up against a potential fight. So consistently asking questions.
That tone of curiosity.
Yeah. And it's tough. It's tough. I think about my wife and I got married when we were 23 or something. And that skill set when we were young, luckily I worked in juvenile corrections and she worked for a youth shelter. So we were, training every day.
Upskilled pretty quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was for us. It's just always been hey, there isn't a way that's supposed to do this. What are you experiencing? What are you experiencing? And if you can slow down and do that, but again, consistently, not just when you're having a fight or not just when things are going good. I get challenged with it all the time where I go weeks without doing it. But the more consistent you can be about being just curious about not even just what's going on in their day, but where it's coming from, I think it provides a lot of buffer for when things get funky.
Brian, I would love to talk a little bit more about your almost 2-decade long marriage. Is there other than practicing your questions, is there a practice that you've got that helps you keep your relationship filled up?
No, it's not necessarily a practice, but it's something that took a long time, and it's going on walks. And so I'm not saying like going walks to think, but like, it's funny because I used to be an ultramarathoner, but there was a joke, like I would run 10 miles, but I won't walk 2 blocks. I hated walking. But I just went. Like, my wife loves walking. She hates running. She doesn't understand why are you running? We have a car. She would always want to go on walks. And so, and again, initially it was like, grumble and go. And now, 15 years later, we go on walks all the time. And the reason I'm saying walks is there's always going to be something the other person is doing that you either don't like, you don't agree with, or you don't, whatever the case might be. And consistently trying long enough to experience what they're experiencing opens the door to experiences you'll never have alone. And so I think if there's a practice that Jamie and I do pretty well, it's maybe like pressing the pause button on super judging the activity of the other person and just being open to try it out while, you can still whine about, I don't like to do that. But the moment you stop doing it because you don't like to do that, that's where again, you've stopped exploring. So if there's anything we do kind of well, it's trying at least to entertain somebody else's idea for a bit.
And passion for walking.
Yes. And passion for walking. Fair. Yeah.
Hey, this has been a really beautiful chat. I think, if we can all master the art of making ourselves and our partners feel heard, seen, or recognized for something they've contributed to positively, imagine a world where we were all, masterful at providing and receiving validation. So I love what you're doing, and I love the project that you're pushing out into the world and helping people build these muscles. To say thank you for joining us today, we've provided access to 1 week of vocational training to some women who can help develop some business skills in the Philippines. We know that decent work and economic growth is really important to you. So we want to say thank you for being the change that you're being, but also helping us to make that change in the world too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate that. That sounds like a pretty awesome cause. Yeah.
No worries. So, Brian, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do or watch some of your TikToks, how should they do that?
Yeah. You can find me on TikTok at Brian, BRIN _Fretwell, FRETWELL. I'm always throwing stuff on the wall there. So watch 7 and the 8th one might be good. So that's just, but for our program and our company, we're currently transitioning to PeopleStrength. So all one word, PeopleStrength.com. And you can jump on there. We have some free resources, like an outline of, the 5 basic FIRES questions with some explainers behind it. You get that. You get a video that follows each one. All that's free because we want as many people to do this. And we also have twice a month, we have free come in and try it out. So free workouts we do at 6:00 Mountain so that,
who knows what time that is in
Australian friends can join us. Yeah, it's around the noonish, I believe.
I wish we had a cool way to describe our time zone. Mountain time.
Yeah, but,
ocean time.
Yeah, right. But we hold those twice a month. Those are free. Those are kind of an introductory to if somebody wants to check it out. And then of course, our contact information's on PeopleStrength.com, and we're always happy to chat with people about talking about this idea or, helping them out with whatever implementation there is, because we have programs for coaches and leaders, but all the way down to the individual that's just trying to help their family or the folks around them. All of the skills are the same. The practice is, just as necessary. But the upside is that you learn skills that you can do on your own to help folks, and that those skills are actually pretty simple, but it's the consistency that has the impact. Yeah,
I know that's that thing. Simple doesn't always mean easy.
Right, fair. Yeah. Well, I think I said that somebody that used to run 100-mile races with me, he used to be asked all the time, how do you run a 100-mile race? How do you train for a 100-mile race? And his answer was always, well, you run. And if you want to go farther, you just keep running. And I think that's the same with relationship, only we have to know what muscle we're building and be consistent about the workout. That relationship, it just isn't being around each other. It's being interested in each other, and how are we working out that muscle? Yeah.
So, Brian, before we kind of close out, is there one final tip or recommendation or resource you'd like to share with everyone?
Yeah, if there's any other tip for me, it would just be don't take yourself seriously. And maybe that's like more to the men out there. Like, there's any relationship advice, it's like, just own the fact that you don't know, and it'll be a lot easier, right? So laugh at yourself, and the other person, because that's fun too. But but if it's not fun, then you're doing something wrong. So yeah.
Awesome.
Love that.
Thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.